Hello, everybody. This is MBA Waves. We're so excited to join you, MBA hopefuls. And we are your weekly broadcast talking about all things business and education, streaming live every Tuesday. We bring you tons of tips to help you get into the top-ranked MBA programs and get you close and personal with many of the business schools that we also host on the show, as well as professionals in the field where you can get all your questions answered. And if you like this week's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Today, we're super excited. It's episode 123, and we're talking with Hillary Schubach of Shine Consulting. Big welcome to you, Hillary.
Hi, thank you.
Welcome. We're so glad to have you, and welcome everybody. And we're going to dive right in. Today, we're talking about some common mistakes to avoid as an MBA applicant. And we're going to be juicy and as uncensored as possible as we talk about how to turn off MBA admissions committees and what might work better, right? You don't want to turn them off. So what do the AdComs typically expect, Hillary, from applicants to their program?
Well, in a nutshell, if I had to pick one word, it's people displaying the qualities of future leaders who can go out and achieve their goals and change the world and everything in between. But that encompasses a lot of different things, but leaders is the essence of what they're looking for.
So what might turn them off?
Well, there's such a host of responses. So I'm so looking forward to this discussion. This is a juicy topic. And, I've in my mind bucketed the things that turn them off into everything from certain content and topic choices to failure to execute. So I've got a few things in that bucket that we can talk about. There's preparation related things that ultimately turn them off. And there's another big bucket of emotional intelligence related things that can turn them off. Just in essence, professionalism is paramount when entering this process. And I look forward to digging into these buckets and more.
All right. So, most of us kind of have the instinct to not really get into things about religion, sex, politics, in mixed company in general, but definitely when it comes to an interview or speaking with the admissions committee. So it's obviously also true how we present ourselves for interviews and even through our essays. So if these are important aspects to the applicant in being more known or seen, how can applicants present these things without turning off the AdCom or even presenting it in such a way that it's actually a plus, a positive?
Well, so I would say things like religion and politics actually have a really healthy place in the admissions process because the schools really are trying to get to know you. And that is very often a huge aspect of what shapes us into the person we are today. So for certain people, religion's a really big part in their culture and, their spirituality is a big part of who they are. So talking about that in a healthy, productive way and how it's influenced them is valuable. Politics is funny because I think we've all heard, at the AIGAC conference, admissions officers have said, they're trying to build out, of course, a well-rounded class. And while we want to believe that the admissions committees share our views on certain progressive aspects of society today, the truth is that they do want people from all sides of the table so that these healthy discussions can take place in business school. So I know for a fact that schools were really making an effort to make sure that they do include, people that hold all the different perspectives that one can have, especially in the tricky society that we live in right now. So, so being oneself respectfully is very important in this process. You asked about sex. I would say sexuality and gender and all of those topics are same thing. Fair game, welcome, embraced. Every different person is an important component of the class. The actual literal sex topic is probably one that can be avoided. I don't know that unless somebody had a trauma that they really want to discuss, that's also fair game. Addictions, those can all be discussed in a mature way. But things that seem like TMI, like drinking, sex, partying, that don't necessarily reflect professionalism should probably be avoided. I like to say, just pretend you're speaking to the CEO of the firm you're wanting to apply for a job for. Like if you're gunning for a McKinsey type consulting role, things that you wouldn't say to that person might not belong in your application.
Very well said, Hillary. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Good place to start us off. Yeah, those three topics tend to be the big three taboos, particularly in the United States and perhaps Canada as well. But I think what it comes down to is if it is central to your story and you have a mature way of talking about this, then it would be certainly okay. For example, if you're like really an activist and part of it has to do with sexuality and so forth, like why not? Feminism, gender, LGBT stuff. Absolutely. Talking about religion, I had a client, and I think I spoke about this a little bit at the AIGAC conference, which is how we all know each other, by the way, the Association for International Graduate Admissions Consultants.
Logo placement.
Oh yeah, we're ready to go. How I had a client a year or two ago who was applying for a couple of top schools in the States. He's Mormon, and he was really worried about having that appear on his CV. But his experiences as a Mormon were incredible. That first of all, they all go, I think at 18 years old, off for 2 years to a foreign country. In this case, it was Mexico. He picked up Spanish, which he now speaks fluently. He had a leadership position among his Mormon group. And he did a couple of like not-for-profit kind of stuff. Like while he was in Mexico, he created an association to help women who are victims of domestic violence there to have a pathway to get to safety and to get back to. So it's like incredible stuff that business schools are absolutely looking for. And to just prove this point, during our AIGAC Summer with the Schools series, when we had a meeting with the director of admissions at Harvard at the time, I asked this question about this particular candidate, and they were like, "We love the Mormon community, first of all, but in general, these experiences are not an issue at all, for sure in North America. To speak about that, if it's again central to your story and it highlights some of your leadership potential, international exposure, teamwork, great stuff." And I'll stop there to let Krithika take over.
I was just going to say, like, have you met the leadership at Harvard? We have a strong leadership base in the Mormon community, and Clay Christensen, who's one of our most famous, beloved professors, was known for having really made a point of his the importance of his Mormon faith at the beginning of his career when he was expected to work weekends, whatever, consulting. He was like, "I don't work on Sunday," and he wrote a whole beautiful book about it, and he's known for this. And you have to uphold your values. Totally. You want to know those. Anyways.
Krithika, did you want to?
Yeah, and I like it that the class is representative of the society outside, and also what you're going to expect in business school, a business world later. So if you're not going to say it in a job interview, you probably are not going to write it in the application. So that is like a great way. Coming back to the topic here, I have been reading a bunch of essays written by Gen AI and things like it, especially for the past few days, I should say. They're so boring, cliched, and it's just like outright exaggerations, and or sometimes it's even like lying. And I'm sure these are turn-offs. So what do you think when it comes to writing essays might be taboo or a threat to the school?
Shall I dive into this?
Absolutely.
Okay. You got it. So, okay, writing. Well, there's the topics that you're writing and then how you're writing it. But, cliche essay responses was a good one to bring up. That is a turnoff. We know that the schools are looking for authenticity. They say that over and over and over and over again. So, that just makes for more colorful stories and also actually helps them get to know you and what makes you different and strange and interesting. It's, adds color and value to the class. So owning that. It's also good to know that they're looking for a balance of like personal and professional and extracurricular community, what you do outside of work. Like I know that there are people that believe that it really needs to be focused on work, but some of the best essays and examples of leadership or any other topic is can be grounded in an extracurricular or personal example. So as long as the lessons have merit in a professional setting or an academic setting or a number of different settings, use that personal example if that tells your story best. But they do want to see a mix of who you are at work and outside of work. So that's one topic that I would encourage people to focus on.
Please continue.
Yeah, I'll go on. So another one is just like I would say, just essays that say I, like I did this, I did that, I. Like you do want to sell yourself, me. You have to sell yourself, and if you don't take enough credit for your own contributions, then no one's going to do that for you in the admissions process. You have to, but even the best of leaders of the best organizations know that they're not on an island leading an organization. Like, you're only as good as the people around you and the teams that you build around you. So there has to be some healthy balance of I versus we, and who you collaborate with and how you lead others. So being too focused on your contributions can be a turnoff. And on the flip side, doing too much teamwork, you think you're speaking to a team-oriented school like Kellogg, and you think, I need to say everything is a team, then you forget to take credit for your own actions. That's another turnoff. So be sure to balance those two. And yeah, those are like content ideas that I would suggest, I think. And then I've got some things in the execution bucket we could talk about as well, if you like. Other turnoffs really would be going way under the word limit. Like, you think you're doing them a favor maybe because you're short and sweet, but if you are so far under, and I've seen this, like I'll get a 300 or 250 word response for a 400 or 500 word question, and it's not doing you any favors. You don't want to go over the word limits, but you don't want to go way under either. I say if you can aim for like plus or minus 5 to 10%, that's fair, but show that you have something to say and take these questions as a challenge. They're challenging you to write a compelling 400 word essay. Use that space for 400 words. Don't repurpose the content from another school and then just leave it in that format. So that's one. And then similarly, like not answering the whole question is another turnoff. Like when they have a 2-part question, like what matters most to you and why, like the why is the most important part, but certainly at least half of as important as the thing that matters most to you. And people do tend to focus on their own agendas. Like sometimes the why MBA essays, like depending on the school, they'll have like a multi-part, like they're trying to get a sense of the context, and then your goals, and then how the program will help you achieve your goals, and then some other thing. And it's like people are, they come in with this, again, an agenda, maybe because they built the content already for another school, and they're just like trying to force that in. And meanwhile, they missed that 30% of the question hasn't even been covered. In the conferences, each school has made it so clear they labor over every word choice. That's why sometimes the applications don't get released for another week or two. They're like, should we put that one extra word in there, and how's that going to affect the responses we get? And they tweak it every year sometimes. If they're getting responses that are sending people off in a different direction, they know, okay, we need to take that word out and fix the wording. So trust, if the word is there, they want it to be there for a reason. So really, addressing those nuances will avoid the turnoffs that can derail.
Talk about being intentional, right? Like these admissions communities, you're absolutely right. I've been on that side, like developing the questions that were asked for essays, right? And it is a laboring process. Very interesting, but yeah, very good advice. Any more tips in this section you want to add to this?
The one other thing I guess I was getting to ultimately from all of this is just attention to detail shows your professionalism. And so, whether it's everything from like a poorly thought out video background in an essay, in a video essay or an interview, like where you're just, things are all a mess and you don't pay attention to that, to like being inconsistent with the way you handle numbers. That's one of Hillary's pet peeves, is when you have an essay that says like the number 3, and then it's the word written out 5. And it's like, okay, first of all, it should be written out 5, by the way, for essays. Like everything under 10 needs to be written out. That's some free advice for everybody. But if you're gonna, data forms or application forms, you could potentially go either way, and a resume. But pick a lane, like just pick one path and then be consistent with punctuation, the numbering styles, the whatever you do, pay attention to those little details.
Oxford commas.
Oxford commas, 2 spaces, 1 space after a period, like either's fine at this point. Like, yeah, I mean, 1 space is the new thing. Like, it's been the new thing for a long time. I know I'm old, but it's like, just pick a lane. And then, like the wrong school typo, is the famous quintessential admissions mistake. It actually happens. I've seen it happen. People have come to me as a reapplicant showing me their past, and I've found it in my own 2 eyes. I found headings of resumes that were misspelled, like extracurriculars being misspelled, like in giant caps letters, and so it's like just big things that are glaring. Be attentive to details, if for no other reason, like it certainly turns off the admissions committee, but it just shows your professionalism, which is what they're gauging. Like they want to know, who are you going to be in front of our esteemed corporate recruiting partners? How are you going to reflect our alumni community out there in the world? So that's why they're so fussy about it.
Yeah, I have been like smiling along with some of these great tips that you shared, Hillary. And I would say that answering the question is also so important. You mentioned about answering parts of the question, but sometimes people miss the point of the question, and that could be because they're possibly misled, or they think of it in different ways, and they can influence by multiple things and so on. But I feel that like answering the question is something like that people should focus on, right? And yeah, and I was just also like, when you were mentioning about the how the AdCom belabors over the essays, I was just remembering the Tuck essay with the nice. We're looking for people who are nice, if you remember that. So, which was which led to some very interesting essays that year. So.
Yeah, like you said, Hillary, about some people having an agenda. Like, some people, I mean, they've rightfully so thought through their story. They've developed kind of their personal brand. They want to deliver a certain message, and then in an attempt to deliver that message, they somehow just miss the question entirely, like what Krithika is saying. Just be sure you answer the question. If you want to somehow weave in the thing that you want to talk about into it, if it works, great. But if you're failing to do what's asked, that's the the first thing you need to do.
Well, you bring up you brought up this point about what happens when you put the wrong school down, or what happens when you put the wrong professor down, or the wrong sort of focus that a school might have. And we're talking about how that's not good, but how does someone recover professionally from that in the application process?
Well, I have to say, if you ask 10 admissions consultants, they probably would give you, they'd split the answer, but it's a judgment call on whether you bring it up. I think if it's one slip up in a small place, like the typo on the header, like if it's a day or so after you've submitted and you want to, one thing you could potentially do if it's like a new resume, you want to just resend the file. It's not illegal to inquire about whether it might be possible to attach a new file, but if you've just made a big blunder, a wrong school typo, it like kind of is what it is. But if you've misstated something that you think is central to your story or something else, I would perhaps correct it if it's going to really send them off in a different direction about you. It's what you're supposed to do in an interview. I'm trying to think of an example. That's why I'm speaking so slowly. I'm just racking my brain, like when you would say the wrong thing about your own story. But I don't know that I'd call attention to a whole typo, like just for that purpose. But but in an interview, like if things went really awry somehow, maybe the interviewer wasn't a fit, or like they kind of weren't reacting well to you in a way that was notable to you and you felt concerned, it's better to bring it up than to just let something like that slide. Like if it's, if there's something out of your control, I certainly would try to bring it up. A technical glitch related to submitting something, even just getting the application in on time somehow, and like the recommender had a technical glitch. I've seen people do that. They've recovered from the recommender failing by just reaching out to the school and or getting a new interview when an interviewer seemed to be like having an issue with them somehow. But it's just, ultimately, as with everything, it's a judgment call.
Yeah, and this is exactly why people should start early and
Thank you.
have like other people proofread their stuff, because it's very easy to miss those things staring at you. And this is exactly why you need to write and edit, and wear those hats, alternatively.
This is the difference between a blunder in an essay or a CV versus the interview, right? Very likely, if you're working on your resume or CV, or if you're writing your essays, you look at something for so long, you don't notice the details, right? Things just like blend into the background of the wallpaper. And that's why it's so important to have someone you trust to proofread and catch those things. And that's like obviously a great argument for working with a consultant. But then there's the interview side where you're less likely to have that kind of a mistake, and more likely to have the kind of mistake where, you're probably applying to at least 3, 4, 5 schools, right? It's kind of a healthy range. And you've done the research on all these schools, and you might have like superimposed the detail from one school and applied it onto another. And you start talking in the interview about, I don't know, the amazing volleyball team at Kellogg, and like, oops, you didn't win the tournament that year, Harvard, whatever, something like that. And I think, hopefully you realize it. And I think the best thing to do is to own it. It always comes down to authenticity and like how you, because an interview, just like your application in general and business school in general, is a sort of miniature version, a microcosm for the real world, for the business world. And, mistakes happen. And how do you recover for them? Can you acknowledge them? Can you recover with grace? Can you fix the mistake? I think, and making people feel better, making connections, smoothing it over, whether it's about making the boss happy or the client happy. Things go on, right? Mistakes happen. We're human. And I think it's very much how you recover from it. So owning it and coming back to the story you intended to tell in the first place is probably the best way to get around that.
Owning it with grace is an interesting, like, I'm picturing if somebody really accidentally pasted in like a whole paragraph about another school that was just, wasn't just a wrong school typo, but they just genuinely had a major blunder where it wasn't even like the right content or essay, it was just a plain old like big gaffe. I bet you owning it with grace and writing some witty response to the schools with the corrected essay, could possibly earn some favor with, because that would be how you'd handle it in real life. Like in that case, I would probably attempt to fix it. If it's just a little typo, you might hope, well, maybe they'll be reading it quickly and they won't see. But if it's like a major piece of content, I might go for it. I might do what Eric is suggesting and try to like really engage them about it and say, here, it might work.
What I also heard from one admissions director, I won't say which school, but he was saying like, this happens where, at least for the foundation of your essay, if it's a very similar question, like why the MBA kind of thing, that's going to be asked by many schools, there is a copy paste moment. And then you kind of tweak it for the school. To most people, I think, do, rather than starting from scratch. And he's like, I'm more understanding of that kind of thing where I see the wrong name, like you put X school and we're Y school, then a whole like content thing, like their values thing is wrong, or, where they just don't understand who we are. That for this person, this admissions director, was a bigger blunder than just putting, even though like saying the wrong school name is like a major gaffe, like it's like an innocent mistake that's reasonable, Anyway.
Yeah. Well, like Krithika said, like, I mean, our clients don't have those issues because we help them with it. But I've seen reapplicants, where it's happened. And I've seen reapplicants who have used admissions consultants where they've still had the major typos. In fact, the resume headings person, there were 2 headings that were had typos, 2 headings in a resume, and they had an admissions consultant. So like, it's it's important to pick a good admissions consultant, but just to have help, like, and to have your friends, like Eric was saying, have people with a fresh set of eyes. But my reco is ask people who didn't go to business school for that stage. Like ask your aunt, whoever, like just somebody that maybe has nothing to do with business, that just knows how to read and is attentive enough to detail that they can help you just triple check for those kinds of disasters and your consistency of punctuation, and, not at that 11th hour give you last minute content advice. ask the business school friends while you're building your content for those, like I would say at least 2 clean, fresh sets of eyes during your final proofreading stage, in addition to a consultant. It's like, just make sure you get that, that help for those disaster checks. And you really shouldn't have that pressure. It's only if you're like at the 11th hour, that these issues come up. There's plenty of time to get this right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And coming to another topic, so we know that most of communication is actually like, it's believed that 93% of understanding comes through nonverbal communication. And it may be controversial, and only 7% comes from words alone. So while this may be relevant, during interviews, of course, how do you think the tone and texture comes across in the essays as well as the other elements of the application? And what should applicants be aware of such that, they don't have any mistakes here?
Tone and texture. So I think this comes down to, well, first, as we were discussing earlier, the professionalism, obviously knowing your audience is, this is not a friend that you're writing this to. It's just, let me back up. This is 2023. It's a really challenging time to be an admissions consultant because we're very casual now in our communications, with texting especially. That's our main mode of contact to a lot of folks. So I've seen so many notes to admissions committee members, clarifying something, saying, hey, Diane, such and such. And I would say, no, hey, Diane, like, this is not your friend. They might be very friendly and warm and engaging, but they are here in a position to judge you. And, again, they're judging you as a member of the class, but also as a potential candidate in front of their recruiting partners that they, really want to reflect their students, professionally. So with that said, you have to take everything in light of your audience. So knowing that, attention to detail, professionalism, even in your essays, is important. Also, though, really doing your diligence to get to know the school, it, really comes through. Like, I know it just sounds obvious, but you have to take the time to convince your school that you know them and you feel them and you understand them. And some schools care a lot more about that than others, but they all care about it. They all really want to know that you've chosen them. You are pursuing them because you feel like you are fit for them. So having those conversations with friends, alums, students, whoever that might be part of that community can be really handy to get a sense of the way we speak about our school. So just getting the tone and feel right as it relates to that school's values and who they are and what they care about can be really valuable. I know they all start running into one another and they all sort of sound the same after a while, but there are little nuances and you can help the school especially a smaller school that really cares about getting people that want to attend their smaller program and be part of this smaller community, getting to know how they feel about their school can really come out in a beautiful way through tone in the essays.
I'm thinking about how there's often this loop where what happens if you're in an interview and the person you're speaking with gets turned off by something you said, and then you realize, oh my gosh, they're turned off. What do I need to do? Or I'm turned off by something the person that's interviewing me said, right? It could really go both ways. And so I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about how does the applicant deal with their own turn off in an interview? And then how does the person interviewing deal with their turn off if and how does the applicant help them get less turned off if that happens?
I'm just thinking, it's this is interviewing 101. It's not even specific to graduate school or business school. It's just like any job. It's what do you do when it's just going downhill? On the upside, unlike a job, it's not all about the interview. A job's partly about your qualifications, but it all really comes down to that interview and with business school, I mean, the interview is very important, but I think on the whole, most people do fine. Some people can absolutely like shine like a superstar in their interview and win favor over other people, boost their standing, just because how great it was. And I'm sure there are plenty of people that tank their interviews, but I've got to believe that most qualified candidates who are like really good candidates for these schools, do just fine. But recognizing that it's just one of, 10 roughly, criteria that are being considered can be helpful. It's not a pass-fail process. So at least try to go in recognizing it's not pass-fail. Like you can pass the interview with flying colors and still end up not getting in just because ultimately they're building out their class. So, but if you genuinely feel like they're not liking you, I mean, again, I did mention this, but if you really feel like you've survived the interview, but you're just feeling like things were not appropriate or professional, or like this person had something against you, you are actually supposed to bring it up. Like schools want to hear it. You have to do it very delicately, but they want to know. They want to give you a chance to have another interviewer if that's best, and they want to, perhaps this person needs to not be an interviewer. It's like they really want to get, this is their touch point to the best candidates. They want to like you. Like they're going and hoping they're going to fall in love with every applicant and just build their class and kind of be done. Like they don't want to. They're not here like trying to rule everybody out and then be left with nothing. And on the flip side, they want to win you over versus their competitor schools. They know you're interviewing other places. So it's like a win-win. So hopefully, they are there and well-trained and went through all the bias training and all the things, to really be an open, if not just neutral, interviewing experience. But that's one thing I would say if it really feels like that. But otherwise, I don't know. I mean, how would you recover in a job interview, even if it's going poorly? I suppose you could. I mean, you could just try to, power through and, get your poise and composure back for the next question. I suppose if it was horrific, you could ask if there's anything else that you could address to make sure that you could offer, have I answered your question? The way, have we gotten to the items you were looking to get from that question or from me, and, maybe see if they have something to say about how it's going. But I'd probably try to recover. they're so short. They're like 30 minutes. So I would try to like get myself together and then think about it afterwards. If it was really as bad as you think, it's very likely that they.
So I have like a story to share here.
Yeah.
I had I'm not going to name the school. I had somebody who interviewed with an alum, and this was an international candidate, and of course the alum was 2-3 time zones away. So it turned out that the person was being interviewed at 3:30 a.m. Their time, right? And during the time, what happened was, I think the alum's connection wasn't so great or something, or the person was traveling and something and so on. So it just was very short, not really what the person wanted. And of course, there was some kind of an issue. So the person just wrote to the admissions committee saying that, hey, this is how it went. I tried my best and this is what happened. But do you think you have something sufficient for... do you think you have everything that's required to evaluate me and my candidacy? And surprisingly, they got another interview with another alum. So, and I really want to put this out there because, as you rightly said, Hillary, and as we hear the schools say many times, it could be a factor of logistics, technical difficulties. It could be like something else as well happening, and it may not be necessarily only one factor that probably triggers this turn off. So if you feel that there's something off with your interview and probably that you haven't been evaluated fairly, and if you feel that like, hey, this should have gone better, or I should have been able to hear the person, or I should have been able to see the person and things like that, I think you should put it out there and ask if, and just put it out there and see like what the response is. And schools are pretty like open about it.
It's a really good point, Krithika. I've heard multiple admissions committees say that they would accept, especially if it's an alumni interviewing, because these alumni, they're not professional interviewers. They normally, 99% of the time, it's going to be somebody who is doing their best and who, has been at least briefed, if not fully trained on how to interview and what they're looking for, the kinds of questions, and so forth. But once in a while, you're going to fall on someone who's having a bad day or is just not doing the right thing. And I think it's absolutely appropriate to come to the admissions committee and say, listen, I had this issue. Would it be possible to set up another one? Even you could ask. So yeah, good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Krithika.
Because actually, unlike a job, I'm just thinking about job interviews, there are usually 5 key people you need to meet with no matter what. So what are you going to do? Like your hiring manager is your hiring manager. And if it doesn't go well, you might be out of luck. But in the admissions world, decisions are made by committee. Your final decision maker is not usually just that person that interviewed you. Sometimes it's just, it's an alum or a staff member, but then they're coming back with that data to the committee. So the committee wants the data on how your interview went. So it's so easy for them, unlike in a job, to just go get another interview with you. Like it's no skill. They're back there. They have weeks to interview different candidates. It's not like they have to decide tomorrow, so it's like it's really not a big deal if you say it in this respectful way, like you did, like just that's okay.
Back to your previous point about if you've made a major blunder during an interview and how do you recover from that? I think this takes both a lot of self-awareness as well as a lot of like being able to read the person in front of you. So just like interpersonal skills and like, are they looking at me funny? Or do I have like a booger on my face? Or did I say something really offensive? Did I upset them somehow? Or is it just in my head? Is it my nerves? So it's really the back and forth of like self versus them. But if you feel that you've really like stick your foot in it, like at that point, you probably have nothing to lose. Then like really it's all about connecting and try to like reel it back in. Like what did I do wrong? Try to like, it's a skill, man. When you're responding to a question, but your mind is elsewhere trying to figure out what you said previously that might have upset this person potentially and figure out how to, so you could even like kind of sort of step out of character. It's like, did I say something that maybe gave you the wrong impression? Maybe like we can go back to the previous thing we were talking about and like try to circle back. Because at this point, I feel like you have not much to lose. If you're sure that they're not happy with something, I think the only way to recover is to go straight for it and dive into it and see maybe there was a misunderstanding. And that's a funny thing about like language, especially when you're talking about like American English versus British or Australian English. Like there's certain expressions that are different in different countries, or when people are translating from French or Spanish or Italian or German into English, and the weight of words is different across different languages. I've gotten to this situation, I can't tell you how many times, where people are talking and they're from different backgrounds. And so they say something which is totally normal, but in the other person's mind, they're translating and it comes off wrong. So these are opportunities for, I think, underscoring your internationalness, the fact that you bring diversity to the table. And so if that's the case, if you've like had some kind of misunderstanding and you happen to be from a different culture or language or country, then you could kind of blame it on that and use that as a way to like circle back and recover from your mistake. Blame it on the language difference. What was that movie? Bill Murray in Japan.
Lost in translation.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's also the thank you note too. If you didn't think of it in the moment, but you're kicking yourself as you're walking out the door. I mean, obviously take a minute to regroup, but you do have that moment before they've written up their report and submitted it, when they'll, potentially be receiving a thank you note for you. And it's not that I would suggest you make a whole big fuss and a thing, but you could always add a point of clarity in a thank you note, or like sometimes the discussion will prompt you to think about something further, and I was thinking about that thing we discussed, and blah blah blah, and you could use it in a positive, productive way in the thank you note, or in a way to try to clarify something you think didn't go well. So again, you want to still keep it short and sweet and not give them a whole new essay on this topic, but there is an opportunity as a follow-up.
So good argument for a follow-up email minutes after you leave the room.
Yeah, and as I'm hearing you all speak, I can see the parallel to leadership. How important whatever you said is for becoming a good leader. And it just like, that's why I love the application process, because it kind of starts grooming you into the leader that you should be right from the application.
Mm. I wanted to ask a question to the room. I think Bara's on mute, maybe.
I am, but ask the question, Eric, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay, so what would you guys do if you say you're in an interview? Could be MBA, could be otherwise, and the person who's interviewing you make some kind of joke or reference that's kind of off color or you find offensive? How do you handle that? Like, some people might be inclined to go along with it, or then you feeding into their bigotry, or you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to be like calling them out, or do you? Like, how would you react?
It's a really good question. We sort of touched on it a little bit before, but what happens if they say something like that's so politically or like is just so offensive to you? Or if, yeah, I mean, I would imagine that what advice we've gotten is that you might want to report it back to the school afterwards and not really engage too much with it, just allow it to kind of wash over, and then I don't know.
If it was inappropriate, I suppose at the minimum, I would ensure that the schools know, again, with a similar kind of tone to what Krithika suggested, just, respectful and making sure that they got what they were looking for from you. But in the moment, I think what you would do in business school, right? If you're amongst your colleagues, your classmates, you're supposed to like have healthy discussions where you're sharing different perspectives. So perhaps you can engage in a respectful way and try to, they're there to interview you for the most part. So it's not going to be tons and tons of dialogue, but I would imagine that you could do it in a respectful way where you could say something acknowledging that you understand, or you hear them, and you understand this is their perspective, and then respectfully, sharing your perspective as part of it without devaluing or diminishing or shutting down their right to have their perspective. I can't imagine they would test you, put something out there that they don't, really believe, but just to see how you'd react. But you could just think of it like you would, whether it's in the workplace or at school. They do want these people from different sides of the table, again, to be in a room. But the other thing that they're looking for in these interviews and in the application process is your willingness to listen and learn and adapt. And sometimes your perspective, as passionate as you may be, is not, either the only perspective, certainly, or the right perspective in the end, or there's a meeting in the middle that needs to take place. So perhaps think of it as you would in any discussion where you're in a professional environment or academic environment, and, everyone's got a different way of looking at something and honoring that.
You hit it on the head, Hillary. The word perspective. First of all, if I was in that situation, the person interviewing me said something that I found really horrible, like either like racist or homophobic or whatever it was, like definitely I would say do not get on that bandwagon and agree with just to pander to them thinking that you're going to get brownie points. First of all, it could be a test. Second of all, I think you'll walk out of the interview feeling sick to your stomach that you just said something that's totally against your values. Does that mean the right answer? What was that?
The triple bonus round.
Yeah, right. Okay, lightning round. Yeah, definitely don't like go along with anything that's heinous like that. And on the other hand, you could say, and first I would say is take a breath. Like, don't lose your cool either. Don't like give them a lesson or a lecture and how they should be thinking. I would just say something that's a really interesting perspective. Was like, I think this, and just say what you have to say in a simple way and keep it neutral. Don't let your emotions get the best of you. And if you really think that it's either dangerous or it's like really like bad, or maybe it was like a sexual advance, even if this is very, very unlikely, right? But like stranger things have happened. Hashtag me too. It definitely could be like reporting to the right person. Like, this is what's happened. And first of all, I'm concerned about my admission, and I'm concerned about the reputation of the school. And also, finally, I would say this could be a sign if you're not getting a good response from the person you've come to that this is not the school for you. If it's really that much not in alignment with your values. So tough situation. I was just curious what you guys had to say about it. Thank you.
Yeah, like, so to add probably like the last word on it, I would say that knowing where the person is coming from and probably the context to that remark in that conversation might change my response to it. But whatever it is, if it makes me feel uncomfortable, probably I will let the person know. And of course, say that, hey, this is your perspective. This might be my perspective. And, we let it be. And if it's probably not relevant to the conversation, which is obviously about like why you're applying to the particular business school, then you might want to let it slide in terms of, just letting it be and then moving on.
I'm also thinking,
sorry, Bara, go ahead.
I'm also thinking like we're talking a lot. I thought you brought up an amazing point, Hillary, about they want to have lots of different people at the table, but that's not an invitation to not go in with your particular point. Like, don't try to gain like, well, what's a minority view? Let me go in as that candidate, right? I don't know that anyone would have that strategy, but maybe. And so I just want to mention, like, you go in as yourself, and that the schools want to have a diversity, but you don't have to make yourself more diverse or more something that you're not in your whole process, because that's not necessarily going to be, that's not authentic.
Yeah, I mean, writing and or saying what you think they want to hear. Like, I want to launch a startup when I graduate because they're looking for entrepreneurs. Like, don't say anything that's not, you shouldn't be playing a character, the minority character or something. That's a great point, both for interviews and for writing. But also too, I wanted to say, like, if this person, if they're offensive in some way, whatever, and you told admissions and maybe they've, you get a new interview, I would try hard also to keep in perspective this one person. And, I'd hate for you to derail your lifelong passion of getting to attend, school X, and you've made it to the interview stage, and this one person, like, maybe isn't likely to have been your best friend in that class anyway, so, like, but if you can just recognize this one person, maybe one, outlier of a person, but you still are otherwise really excited about the school, try to take it as one touch point, just as they'll be doing with you.
Right. I think it is really important. And these are all skills leaders need to embrace, right? These are all cultivating ways of becoming the best leader that you can be. I'm curious if you have any cautionary tales or any final suggestions on how applicants have dealt with any of this, like real life situations where you think they dealt with it really well or dealt with it really poorly.
Yeah.
Any of you?
Yes. Okay, so a cautionary tale, and then also separately how to deal with it. So I'll start with the quicker one, which is how to deal with it well. And these aren't things so much in the moment, but just with any red flag, if there's something really that goes awry, whether it's, in that moment of an interview, or, whether you submitted the wrong thing, or you just had a major blip in your trajectory in your life, like, massive problem that happened in college, like getting kicked out for major infractions. The best thing that I've seen people do is own it and be forthcoming. And that's what, in the application process, that optional essay is for. And I know it sounds crazy, but I've now seen firsthand with my clients, I've seen these are people that got into top, let's just say top 15 schools, top 3, top 10 and 15, or like 3 schools I'm thinking of, that have been, that plagiarized and was kicked out of college for plagiarism. I had someone else that had sold drugs on campus and was kicked out for selling drugs. I had somebody who just had a disciplinary probation during a frat party, and that had to go on their application because they asked a direct question about, probation and such in the academic experience. And all of these people, I told them to just be forthcoming. We use the optional essay to show that they've reflected and grown and learned, and where appropriate, made a positive trajectory, in that realm going forward. And it worked for all of, they all got into great schools. Maybe they were turned away from some schools. Maybe there were some schools that just weren't willing to forgive, but there were others that were. So it's always better to be honest than to always be looking over your shoulder that you might have, like, covered up something that could be found out later, because they will remove you from contention. And then I think the cautionary tale is just not underestimating the competition. Like, it is still really important to have a strong academic profile. Emotional intelligence and it is really paramount. Like, knowing that, yes, they are looking at the way you write and speak to them as a professional. Yes, they are looking at both your professional trajectory and all of those merits, as well as your academic trajectory and the test scores. And those things are all important. So, I know people feel really so proud of all the things they've done, and then they just like, oh, it's going to be okay if I submit this low score. I don't want to be bothered anymore. And it's like, they're all really important. They're all important. There's always something that can be forgiven, but you need every single thing working for you to the best of your ability to control it. So use that power and get to deliver the best all around profile. And that's the best way to, go into it.
100%.
Yeah. Well, this has been so fun and so interesting, and it's all we have time for today. I want to thank you, Hillary, for joining us, and I want to thank
you.
The folks that are listening to us now, the folks that will be listening to us, and MBA hopefuls. If you like today's episode, please give us a little thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to MBA Waves to stay on top of all of the latest trends and news in the world of MBAs, business, and education. And finally, don't forget to check us out next week, same time and place. And for full access of upcoming and past episodes, head to mbawaves.com. Have a great week and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Heather.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. See you next week.